Now. Now we get serious. It gives me really great pleasure to welcome Steve Moore to Brown. Steve is a senior economic writer at the Wall Street Journal. He's the founder and former president of the Club for Growth. In 2007, Steve won the Ronald Reagan Great Communicator Award for his increasing economic understanding across the country and the world. He's the author of 6 books. The most recent book is Who's the Fairest of Them All? The Truth About Taxes, Income, and Wealth in America. Please join me in welcoming Steve.
Boy, good evening, folks. Thank you for bringing me to Brown, John. It's fantastic to be here. Special thanks to the Smiths. Thank you so much for allowing me to come, and it's just a real honor to be on the campus at Brown University, one of America's great colleges. I was here 15 years ago, so this is a bit of a homecoming, and so I'm just very delighted. And I know that you all have very busy schedules with your classes and your finals coming up. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening to listen to me talk. My day job is working at the Wall Street Journal. I work for the editorial page. How many of you in this room, and be honest, how many of you read the Wall Street Journal? Raise your hand. Wow, I'm impressed. How many of you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page? About half of you. That is impressive.
That's what we all meant.
Well taught. So I've got to tell you this. I work in the newspaper business. This is a tough industry. As you know, this is an industry that is declining every year as more and more people get their newspaper on their cell phone. And so it's a tough business, but we are actually doing pretty well at the Wall Street Journal. There's 5 major newspapers in the country today. There's the Wall Street Journal, there's the New York Times, there's the LA Times, there's USA Today, and the Washington Post. And only one of those 5 newspapers is making money today. Anybody want to take a guess at what paper that is? It's the Wall Street Journal, so we're very pleased about that. And by the way, I don't know how many of you have looked recently at the New York Times, the finances for the New York Times. That newspaper is about this close to being in federal bankruptcy court, and it just couldn't happen to a nicer group of people. Just kidding. I don't want to be quoted on that. But let me give you one piece of serious advice. Maybe the best advice I can give you this evening, if you want to be the smartest person in the room, and you want to be up to speed on all of the major issues of the day, whether it's what's happening in the Middle East, or what's happening in politics, or what's happening in finance and Wall Street, or what's happening with the real economy in the U.S., the best piece of advice I can give you today is when you have your Starbucks coffee in the morning, just take 10 or 15 minutes out of your morning and read those 3 or 4 editorials that we publish in the Wall Street Journal every morning. And if you do that, you will be enlightened about all of the things and events that are going on in the world. And we have obviously a very pro-free market kind of orientation at the Wall Street Journal. For the last 60 years, our editorial position has been free minds, free markets, and free people. So it's a very kind of pro-free enterprise orientation to what's going on in the world. But I think, no matter what your orientation is, I know some of you in here are liberals, or some conservatives, some libertarians, whatever your perspective on life is, I think you're going to benefit greatly from reading those editorials. But the other thing that I do that John mentioned is that about 3 months ago, I became a contributor to Fox News channel. And I just wonder, how many of you in this room, and be honest, how many of you watch Fox News pretty regularly? That's about half of you do. How many of you watch MSNBC? Raise your hand. You're in the wrong room. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for coming, actually. I'm glad that the people are listening to the kind of other perspective are in the room. And I'm really actually looking forward to the question and answer period, because I think that's the most fun when I come onto college campuses. By the way, for those of you who watch Fox News, you all know the motto for Fox News, right, John? It's Fox News, fair, balanced, and blonde. Right? I've met a lot of beautiful women at Fox News, and it's one of the fringe benefits of working there. By the way, not to brag about Fox News now that I'm an employer there, but at night now, Fox News has a bigger audience at night than MSNBC, CNN, and CNBC combined. So that's a pretty amazing thing. I wanted to mention one quick story, if I could, about a couple of the students were asking me about what my favorite story is in the 8 years that I've worked at the Wall Street Journal. I've covered all sorts of amazing things, and one of the things we do that you probably know, John, in our Saturday paper now is we do a long interview with a famous person. So I've interviewed everybody from Barack Obama to John McCain to Mitt Romney to captains of industry like Charles Schwab and Fred Smith, the CEO of Federal Express, and on down the line. But the most interesting person that I ever interviewed at the Wall Street Journal was a man by the name of Art Linkletter. Now, how many of you in this room are old enough to remember who Art Linkletter was? Raise your hand. About half of you. Most of you are under the age of 25. You probably have no idea who Art Linkletter was, but I've got to just tell you the story because he was an amazing guy. Art Linkletter was the first, you remember Art Linkletter, don't you? Art Linkletter was the first major voice of radio, and then he was one of the few people in the 1930s and 40s who actually made the successful transition from radio to TV. And in the 50s and 60s, he had the most popular TV show on air, on broadcast television. And one of the things that he used to do, by the way, one of the first questions I asked him, because he was 96 years old when I interviewed him. He lived up in Beverly Hills. And actually, I was quite honored by the fact that he died about a year after I interviewed him. So I was one of the last people to interview this living legend who knew everybody from, Ronald Reagan to, Jack Benny to the Marx Brothers to Jackie Gleason, all the people in the golden age of Hollywood. And so I couldn't resist asking him. Some of you who remember his show, he had a TV show which was called, remember this one? Kids Say the Darndest Things. And what he used to do is he used to bring these young kids up on the set, and he would interview them, and they would say the darndest things. It was just an adorable show. So I couldn't resist. I said, out of all the years you did that show, what was your favorite incident? And without hesitation, he said, Steve, he said, one time I brought this little boy up. He was like 6 years old. And in the middle of this interview with this young boy, the boy just starts crying and the tears starts just falling down his cheeks. And Art, consolingly puts his arm around this little boy and says, son, why are you so sad today? Why are you crying? And the little boy says, well, Mr. Linkletter, my dog just died. So Art, is trying to cheer this boy up. And he finally says to his son, he says, son, you shouldn't feel so sad about your dog dying. He said, because I want to assure you of something. I want you to take this to heart. Right now, your dog is up in heaven with God. And the little boy says to Art Linkletter says, well, Mr. Linkletter, what would God want with a dead dog? And that's one of my favorite stories of working at the Journal. He was a very funny guy. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what is going on with this economy. It's a tough act to follow. You've just heard from two of the great economists of the 20th century, and John Maynard Keynes and Hayek, but I want to talk a little bit about what's going on contemporaneously in this U.S. economy and try to weave into this why it is that this free market system is a system that has made the United States the richest country in the history of the planet. And I guess if there's any theme to this whole lecture that I'm going to give, it's simply this, that the free enterprise system, for all its faults, is the goose that lays the golden eggs. And that if we depart from it, we're moving in a direction that is going to be making us poorer, not richer. And that really, I would make the case to you, is the whole lesson of the 20th century. That I remember Milton Friedman, who I actually knew. Milton Friedman, I used to have dinner with Milton Friedman 2 or 3 times a year when he was in his 90s, when he lived up in San Francisco. And Milton Friedman, he was famous for a lot of things. But one of the things that he used to say towards the end of his life is that the fundamental lesson that we all learn from the 20th century really boils down to this, that the free enterprise system is a success and socialism is a failure. It's really as simple as that. And that should be the enduring lesson of the 20th century. And by the way, the next thing that Milton Friedman always told me is, he said, and my frustration is that even though we've learned this lesson repeatedly, over and over and over again, that the free enterprise system is a success and socialism is a failure, the politicians of all countries seem to deduce from this is what we need is more socialism. Right? And he always scratched his head and couldn't understand why. And that's a relevant point, because we are living right now through one of the great debacles of all time in public policy. They're going to be writing about Obamacare 20, 50, 100 years from now as one of the great government failures of our time. And actually, as someone who opposed this from the start, I actually think this is an important lesson that we all as Americans are learning. And let me say this: most of you are, in your teens or your early 20s in this room. One of the things that you all need to recognize about Obamacare, and by the way, the major failure of Obamacare is not the fact that the website doesn't work, right? I mean, at some point this website will be operational. It's not that complicated to run a website. The real problem with Obamacare is that it basically denies people choices in healthcare, and it is a kind of invasion in the whole free enterprise system of healthcare, which, by the way, we don't have in this country. If you look at the dysfunctions in our healthcare system, and Barack Obama is right, healthcare costs way too much. There's no question about it. We should be paying a lot less for health care, but it's not because of the fact that not enough people have insurance. In fact, I would make the case to you that most Americans today are overinsured for health care, not underinsured. And when you've got a third-party payer system, which is what we have in health care right now, that does drive up costs. But here is the fundamental problem with Obamacare, especially for your generation, for those of you who are in your 20s or 30s. Guess who is going to pay the cost of this system? What Obamacare really is a system of unbelievable cross subsidies between one generation and another, and between one group of people and another. And what we find, and we've looked at the evidence very clearly on this with respect to Obamacare, is the people who are going to pay by far the most for all of these new coverage plans are people like yourself. So when you're able to go to the, by the way, how many of you in this room who are students, how many of you have health insurance? Most of you do, right, through the university and so on. And once you start working, you're going to either get your insurance through your job, or until you're 26, you'll get it through your parents. But when you start actually shopping around for health insurance, when you leave this school and actually get into the real world of work and finance, what you're going to find is that the cost of the insurance that's offered to you under the exchanges is going to be significantly more expensive than what you could get if you could just shop around. And what most of you probably would want, because you're young and most of you are healthy, you want simply a plan that does what insurance is supposed to do, right? And what insurance is supposed to do is protect against major risks, major catastrophes. So what we all want is insurance from some kind of terrible event, such as the fact that we might get cancer or heart disease, or we might break our leg, or we might get some kind of chronic disease. In that case, the reason we have insurance is that we all are protecting each other against that kind of unforeseen event, and we're all paying into the same pool, and then if one of us or two of us in this room gets a disease, we're all covered for this. But what you don't need is health insurance for minor and routine expenses, right? So, for example, I would make the case to you, no matter where you stand on things like, whether the government should fund things like birth control, why would you even have insurance for birth control, right? Why would you want to insure for that? It's not the kind of unforeseen event that you have insurance for. So here's the point I'm making. Most of you, when you start going to those exchanges. By the way, how many of you in this room have actually gone to the exchanges and onto the website and tried to get insurance? Have any of you in this room? I mean, one or two. You still can't crack the code and get into the thing right now. But when you do, what you're going to find is that insurance is going to be about 2 to 3 times more expensive than what you could get in the private market. And this is the big problem. And what you're going to find with Obamacare, and this is happening right now already, is the sick people are going to sign up for Obamacare, right? The sickest people and the oldest people and the people with pre-existing conditions, obviously they're going to want the coverage because they need the coverage. But the people who are healthy, right, and the people who don't want to have to pay for all of that, they're not going to sign up. And so you're going to get a classic case of what we call adverse selection. and that is to say, the sick sign up, the healthy don't, and if only the sick people sign up, guess what? The cost of the insurance goes way through the roof, and it gets more and more expensive, and as it gets more and more expensive, what do healthy people do? More and more healthy people drop out because they can't afford it, and so what I'm saying to you is Obamacare is going to lead to a profound death spiral. And when that happens, I think the whole system is going to collapse. And it's incumbent on us, as people who believe in the free market, to come up with a system that is much more rational, that allows people to buy health insurance across lines, that allows small businesses to form associations together so they can package deals together for large numbers of workers, and things like that. And by the way, most importantly, so that people can buy high deductible plans, which are now illegal under Obamacare. So you might have a plan that has say $1,000 or $1,500 deductible, and what that means is that you're going to pay your health care expenses up to $1,000 or $1,500, but above that, you are protected for the catastrophic kinds of events that we all want insurance for. And that's what the Republicans need to be saying, I think, at this point, is that there is a realistic free market alternative to the system that Barack Obama set up. I will make a prediction to you in this room, having been in politics for 30 years right now. I believe that sometime in the next 6 weeks, Obamacare, at the very least, the entire program is going to be delayed for at least 1 year. By the way, that's very good news. But I would make the case to you that within 6 months, and I would never have said this, John, 3 months ago, but I'll make the case to you in 6 months, the entire Obamacare bill and the entire law is going to be repealed. And that's what a political and policy catastrophe this is. And what I'm saying is I think that conservatives and Republicans and those who believe in the free market better come up with some kind of alternative that's better than the one we have right now. The second point I want to make to you has to do with what's going right with the U.S. economy, because we know what's going wrong. Obamacare is a mess and it's not fixable. But there are so many things that are right about the U.S. economy that simply don't get enough attention. And I want to kind of walk through some of these because I think they're unbelievably exciting, number one, and number two, I think they are tributes to the kind of free enterprise system that we have in this country and the amazing amount of innovation in invention and entrepreneurship that really is the backbone for the U.S. economy. So let me start, if I may, by talking about the one industry in the United States that over the last 4 years has been booming more than any other industry. This is an industry that, if you look at just this industry, it has accounted for over half of the economic growth in the U.S. economy over the last 4 years, and it's accounted for over 40% of all new employment in the U.S. over the last 4 years. Now, I wonder who in this room can tell me what industry I'm talking about. Sir. I'm sorry, I can't. You had your, who, what? The oil and gas industry. What? Yes, oil and gas industry. So this is one of the great untold story of what's happening in America. And there's kind of irony here, by the way, that we have elected, and by the way, I'm not trying to be political here. I'm obviously a conservative and a Republican, but I'm not here. I'm not here to attack the president.
Steve, you mean you can be political without even trying?
Okay, this is a political side. But no, let me put it differently. I'm not trying to be partisan. I know some of you are Democrats, some of you are Republicans. What I want to talk about is ideas. So here's the point, though, that Barack Obama, whether you love him or whether you hate him, I think everyone would agree, this is the greenest president that we have ever elected, right? This is a president who very much believes in the agenda of the environmental groups. This is a president who doesn't like oil a lot. He doesn't like gas. He doesn't like coal. And here is the kind of profound irony of this president. Barack Obama, in his 8 years as president, will have presided over the biggest oil and gas boom in American history. Now, that's an amazing thing to think about, isn't it? And it's happening not because of Washington or not because of what the White House is doing. It's happening in spite of this. And so let me kind of give you a quick story to give you a sense of how exciting this is. How many of you in this room, let me back up a minute. Let me ask you all a quiz question. Who in this room can tell me what state in the United States, you already have your hand up, what state in the United States, you don't even know what I'm going to ask, sir. How can you know what the question is? So, hold on. Here is the question. Who can tell me what state has the lowest unemployment rate in the United States? North Dakota. These guys are pretty smart. They know the answer to the question before I even ask them. That's pretty good. No, North Dakota is exactly right. North Dakota's official unemployment rate is 3%. But I'm here to tell you tonight that that is a bald-faced lie. The unemployment rate in North Dakota is not 3%. The unemployment rate is negative. That is to say, there are 15,000 unfilled jobs in North Dakota right now. I travel all the time, but my main kind of, linkage is between Washington, D.C., where I live, and New York City, where I work 2 days a week. So I'm always going back and forth between Washington and New York. And whenever I see a panhandler on the street, I always say the same thing to them. Go to North Dakota. That's where the jobs are. Now, let me do another quiz for you. How many of you in this room have ever been to the state of North Dakota? Raise your hand. Gosh, maybe about 15, 20% of you. John, I have been to every state in this country multiple times, every continental state. I've never been to Hawaii or Alaska, but I had never been to North Dakota. But a year and a half ago, I went to North Dakota to see what was going on there with respect to this massive oil boom. And by the way, the first piece of advice I will give to you if you decide ever to go to North Dakota is do not go to North Dakota in January. It is really cold there. It didn't get above 0 degrees the entire 4 days I was there. But I went there, as all of you know, because of something called, how many of you have heard of the Bakken Shale? Raise your, almost all of you have. The Bakken Shale, if you haven't heard of it, is the biggest oil find in North America in 50 years. It's a big deal. It's an enormous amount of oil, but it's shale oil, right? It's oil that is trapped in the shale rock. And this oil, by the way, and natural gas has been stored there for literally millions of years. We knew it was there, but we never had the capacity as human beings in the intellectual and technological know-how to figure out how to get at that oil and gas that has been trapped there for time immemorial. And so what has happened is, and this is but before I get into this, let me just say something about North Dakota, because it's an amazing place to go to. I went to this town of Williston, North Dakota. Williston is sitting right atop of the Bakken Shale, and it is an amazing town. To go to Williston, North Dakota today feels like what it must have been like during the gold rush days in California in the 1850s. It's just booming right before your very eyes. I had to spend $289 to stay at a Best Western hotel in Williston, North Dakota. It is booming so much that even the strippers are leaving Las Vegas and they're going to North Dakota because there's more business there. So it is a place that is just booming right before your eyes. So here's the point. Why is it that all of a sudden, this technological revolution has happened? And the answer is because of two unbelievable new inventions that are made in the USA. And just to describe these, I would go out in the middle of these wheat fields, because if you've never been to North Dakota, what you don't know is that North Dakota is just the Great Plains, right? It's just wheat fields everywhere and a few small scattered towns, one of the lowest population states in the United States. So you're standing there out in the middle of this giant wheat field next to this oil rig. And these oil rigs, I mean, it's almost unfathomable that we have the capacity to do this, but these oil rigs can now go 3 miles deep into the ground, these drills. And then, because of this innovation called horizontal drilling, they go to 3 miles deep into the ground, and now, like a spider web, they can go in any direction. That's a very, very new thing, and it makes these rigs much, much more productive. And then, of course, the other innovation on top of this horizontal drilling is something that everyone in this room has heard of 1,000 times, and probably a lot of you have a negative attitude about that, and that is fracking, right? Let me just do a quick survey of you. How many of you have a negative attitude towards hydraulic fracturing or fracking? About half of you. How many of you have a positive? How many of you think of it's a positive thing? So it's about half and half. Well, I don't want to spoil the story, but let me just say this at the outset. Truly, to be against fracking is like being against a cure for cancer. This is one of the most seismic breakthroughs in terms of technological know-how. And let me explain why. What they're doing with this fracking is they're able to drill through this shale rock, which is it's like an armor plate. It's like 18 inches thick. It's amazing they can actually penetrate through this. And once they do, it's like taking a champagne bottle and shaking that up and taking the cork off of it. All of that oil and gas that's been stored there for literally, as I said, millions of years comes up to the top of the rigs. Now, for those of you who think, oh my God, how can you say that fracking is such a great thing? Here's the point of all this. That because of fracking and because of horizontal drilling, and I would say those two technologies really go hand in hand, Because of this, ladies and gentlemen, there is more oil in North Dakota than there is in Saudi Arabia. Now think about that. Think about that with respect to America's energy future. Let me say it again. There's more oil in North Dakota, one state, than there is in Saudi Arabia. But it's not just happening in North Dakota. It's happening all over this great, great country of ours. So Texas, another energy state, in the last 4 years, mostly because of fracking, Texas has doubled its oil output, and it's more than tripled its natural gas output. Now, here on the East Coast, how many of you have heard of the Marcellus Shale? Raise your hand. Most of you have. The Marcellus Shale is the biggest natural gas find virtually anywhere in the world in the last 50 years. And the Marcellus Shale goes all the way from parts of West Virginia and Ohio through Pennsylvania and even to upstate New York, not too far from here. There is 150 years worth of natural gas in the Marcellus Shale. 150 years. It is an astonishing thing. How many of you have ever been to the town of Wheeling, West Virginia? Raise your hand. A few of you have. Let me tell you about Wheeling, because I was there about a year and a half ago as well. Wheeling, West Virginia is also right atop of the Marcellus Shale. If you had been to Wheeling, West Virginia, say 2 or 3 or 5 years ago, Wheeling, West Virginia was one of the most depressing cities in America to go to. It was like the armpit of America. And I hope nobody here is from Wheeling. I don't want to insult you. But I mean, it was a pretty depressing place to go to. I mean, closed down factories, closed down steel mills. Every other store is in foreclosure, and the homes are just dilapidated. Everybody's leaving. You go to downtown Wheeling, West Virginia today, they're opening up Porsche and BMW dealerships in downtown Wheeling, West Virginia. And that's because everybody's getting rich off of fracking. And it's not just happening in West Virginia, it's happening, as I said, all over the East Coast. It's interesting. In New York, one of the states that actually, where there's a lot of, the Marcellus Shale spills into New York, upstate New York, places like Buffalo and places like Syracuse, the legislature in New York actually passed a prohibition against fracking. So they don't allow fracking to go on in New York because they think it pollutes the water and so on. Here's the amazing thing. I mean, you want a great story? You want a great story about American innovation and know-how? You know what they're doing in Pennsylvania? They're drilling down and they're going horizontally underneath New York, and they're taking their oil and gas out. But let me just cut to the chase about this story, because it really is truly transformational with respect to the economy. And it's the big thing that is going to change your future as Americans in a huge, huge way over the next 5, 10, 20, and 30 years. And here's the point. Because of fracking and because of horizontal drilling, in the next 7 years, by the year 2020, and you heard it first here, although I used to say this all the time over the last 2 or 3 years, now it's becoming more conventional thinking. But I've been covering this story for 4 years, so you can tell I get excited about this. Here's the amazing thing, and a lot of you are almost too young to even appreciate how big this is in terms of a seismic change in the U.S. economy. By the year 2020, the United States of America is going to shift from being an oil and gas import country to an oil and gas export country. Now that's huge. And now here's the thing. It's not just huge for our economy, but obviously it is. Think about the implications if I'm right, even if I'm half right about this. Think about what this means for the U.S. economy. What is the number one thing that the United States of America, we as Americans, import more of than anything else from the rest of the world? Oil, right? We spend as Americans about $300 billion a year importing oil, by the way, oftentimes from countries that are not very favorable to the United States, right? Countries like Venezuela, countries like Iran, countries like Saudi Arabia. Think about how this changes our entire economy if instead of having to buy all of this stuff, we can actually sell it. And when you talk about the oil and gas industry, by the way, when I was only half joking when I said, if you're all looking for, a really good job when you get out of this place, think about the oil and gas industry. Those jobs are $75,000, $85,000, $100,000, $120,000 a year. The average job, the average salary job in the oil and gas industry is $82,000 a year. So it's an incredible, these aren't just jobs, they're incredibly high-paying jobs. That's part of the good news. But the other part of the good news is with respect to our national security. I mean, if you think about it, for the last 50 years, the biggest issue, well, let me step back, actually for the last 40 years, because again, most of you in this room are way too young to remember this, you weren't even born then, but 40 years ago, last month, do you remember this, John? Are you old enough to remember this? 40 years ago was the Arab OPEC embargo. I remember it because we had gas lines and all these things. And ever since then, for the last 40 years, the OPEC has had control of this entire market, and they've kind of held the world economy at a knife point. Now they can't do that anymore because of hydraulic fracturing. So it's a huge story. Here's the other part of this, though, spillover effects from this. If you look at the fracking revolution that's going on, one of the things that's happening is that it's dramatically reducing the cost of energy in the United States, especially with respect to energy, not energy, but electricity costs. So the United States of America today has, among all industrialized countries, we are the country more than any other nation that has the lowest price power costs. Now, why does that matter? Because think about that, what that does to the competitiveness of American industry over the next 5, 10, 20 years. If the United States has the lowest power costs, we pay less for electricity than the countries and the companies in Germany and France and Italy and Spain and China and India that we're going to be competing against. This is a jobs magnet. In other words, what this does is it brings jobs to the United States rather than exporting jobs. There's a great story in our paper about 3 weeks ago. It was kind of buried in the middle section that Germany is the only economy in all of Europe that's functioning, right? I mean, the rest of Europe is a complete basket case. But Germany is the one country that's actually still producing things, and their economy is kind of carrying the rest of Europe on their back. But this story was saying that major German manufacturing companies, companies like BMW, are now shutting down factories in Germany, and guess where they want to reopen them? Here in the United States. That's called insourcing of jobs. Anybody want to guess what the number one reason was that these companies were talking about coming to the United States? Energy costs. Our energy costs are lower than the rest of the world. Now, a couple of other things. I know a lot of you probably still have skepticism, fracking is dangerous. And look, there are dangers with fracking. I'm not going to deny that. If we're going to do fracking, and we are going to do it, by the way, this is an unstoppable force, we better make sure that it's done in ways that protect the environment and certainly that protect the water supply. We've been doing fracking, by the way, in this country for 100 years. What's really different is that the technology has become so refined and so sophisticated now that we can get at oil and gas that we couldn't get at before. If we can do that, by the way, we can find a way to do this to clean up our water supply and make sure that contaminants from the fracking don't get into the water that we drink. We all obviously want safe water. But here's the other thing for those of you who are environmentalists who, for example, let's say that you're extremely worried about global warming and climate change. Here's an interesting statistic that just came out a few days ago. Of all the industrialized countries in the world, Japan, China, Australia, the European countries, India, countries like that, guess which country of all the industrialized countries over the last 3 years has reduced its carbon emissions the most? The United States of America. By the way, how many of you knew that? How many of you knew that the U.S., now that's an astonishing statistic, right? It's astonishing because we've reduced our carbon emissions more than anyone else, and guess what? We never signed the Kyoto Treaty, right? We never signed that, right? Al Gore wanted us for 10 years to sign the Kyoto Treaty, and we never did it. By the way, did you see Japan just walked away from the Kyoto Treaty and said they're not going to reduce their carbon emissions because they want their economy to grow faster? So the United States has reduced our carbon emissions by a huge amount. Now, here's the interesting thing. Anybody want to take a guess at why? What is the factor that's causing carbon emissions to fall in the United States vis-a-vis other countries? Yeah.
Substitution of natural gas.
Yes, bingo. And so what is happening, we are transitioning. For those of you who said you don't like fracking, think about this. If you're truly concerned about global warming, then you ought to thank your lucky stars that we have fracking. Because what fracking is doing, fracking is changing the American dependence for electricity from coal to natural gas. And coal does emit a lot of carbons, although it's gotten a lot cleaner, whereas natural gas is a pretty clean burning fuel. As we continue to transition as a nation away from coal towards natural gas, which we have 150 years of, we're going to be reducing our carbon emissions and we're going to be cleaning the environment. So I just think that's an interesting fringe benefit to think about when you talk about what's happening with our energy future. The second point I want to make The other reason I am
Steve.
so incredibly optimistic about the U.S. economy, and here's the point, I probably give about 25 lectures a year on college campuses. How are we doing? 5 minutes? That's all I got left? Oh my God. Okay, 5 minutes. So let me just make this point, if I may. If you look at the U.S. economy, and you look at what is driving it forward, obviously, this energy revolution is having a big impact. But I would make the case to you that, and this is a cliche, but it is almost impossible to understate, that you all are living through this incredible era called the digital age. And the digital age is like let me step back a minute. What we know as economists is that there was this massive spurt of growth that began around the time of the middle of the 18th century, and this was because of the Industrial Revolution, right? And the Industrial Revolution over the next 150 years created this huge spurt of economic growth, and it created enormous increases in living standards in Britain, the United States, and all over the world. What you're living through today is a digital revolution that is happening, that is changing the world like the Industrial Revolution did, but it's happening 20 times faster. The digital revolution is just astonishingly rapid in the way it is transforming world economies and making people richer and giving us more goods and services that we want. And one of the ways I like to kind of convey this to people, so let me just do a quick kind of survey of you in this room. Of the students, how many of you have access to the internet on a regular basis? Well, let me ask this differently, because these are so obvious. Let me ask this differently. How many students in this room do not have access to the internet? Is there anyone? Not one. How many of you in this room do not have a cell phone? Is there anyone? How many of you in this room do not have an iPod? So a couple of you do. How many of you in this room do not have a laptop computer? Now, virtually no one raised your hand. And probably a lot of you are looking at me right now and saying, duh. Of course we have these things, right? Because for your generation, and by the way, I have a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old. They are exactly like you. They don't understand why I would even bring this up. And the answer is because you all think that living without cell phones and living without iPods and living without the internet and living with all these things is like living in the Fred Flintstones era, right? I mean, you all can't imagine living without these things because they've been around basically throughout your life. But guess what? For those of us old enough to remember, 25 years ago, these things hardly existed at all. Right? I mean, remember the PC, IBM PC was just entering the market. Cell phones were almost non-existent. How many of you in this room have ever seen the movie Wall Street? How many of you have seen that movie? If you have never seen it, you actually ought to see it. It was made in 1987. And the reason I bring that movie up is there's a very, very famous scene in that movie where Michael Douglas, who plays the part of Gordon Gekko, the rich fat cat on Wall Street, Michael Douglas is walking down the beaches of Atlantic City, and he's holding in his hand a cell phone, but it's like a brick with an antenna coming out of it with little, rabbit ears. And here's the amazing thing. That movie in 1987, which was just a little over 25 years ago, I went back and did the research. Anybody in this room want to take a guess at what that cell phone cost in 1987? $4,000. You're pretty close. $4,200. So 25 years ago, a cell phone cost $4,200. Now they damn near give them away for free, right? And this isn't just happening in this isn't just the electronic gadget. How many of you in this room have an iPhone, by the way? Here's the amazing thing about the iPhone. I mean, it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The iPhone came out, I think, originally on the market about 6-7 years ago. When it first came out of the market, the iPhone 1 was not a very good machine, especially compared to what you can buy today. The iPhone 1 cost $400 when it first came out. Now they're on, what's the latest one? Is it 6? 5. So the iPhone 5 right now, you can get the iPhone now for less than $250. And John, if you're kind enough to have me back, let's say 2 years from now, or let's say 5 years from now, if you have me back 5 years from now, I will make a guess. I will make a prediction to you that the iPhone will cost $29. And not only that, but think about this. 10 years from now, I would predict to you that everyone on the planet Even the poorest people in Zimbabwe and North Korea, everybody in this planet 10 years from now will have a cell phone. That's because these costs are coming down so unbelievably dramatically. And as I said, it's not just these electronic gadgets, it's happening in every area. Healthcare. I mean, my God, all we want to do is get the government out of the way so the innovations can come forward, you know, at an incredibly steady stream that we're going to see in healthcare. One of the exciting things about being alive today, is that tonight, thank God we're alive tonight. I would make the case to you that within 10 to 15 years, we will have a cure for cancer. We will have cures for heart disease. We'll have cures for multiple sclerosis. We'll have cures for Alzheimer's. All of these terrible chronic diseases and so on, we are within the sights of winning the race for the cure. And so this is an amazing, I guess the point I'm trying to get across to you is don't feel dire and dour about the environment we're living in. Yes, these are tough economic times. We've got this lousy economy, no question about it. What I'm saying to you is this is the best time to ever have lived. There's no time you could point to 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 500 years ago you would have rather been alive than today. And that is a great, great gift. The related point, and John, I promise I'm coming to an end here, is one of the things that you all ought to appreciate, and it's something we don't appreciate enough, is when you look at living standards in the United States, I mean, there are very few countries on a per capita basis that come anywhere near having the standard of living that we all have as Americans. And by the way, even if you're a poor college student, you know, sitting in this room, even as someone with an income or almost no income, you have a living standard today that's higher than the average middle class family did 50 years ago. You live better today than the kings and queens did 100 years ago because of the kind of amazing material progress we've seen in this country. Final point. So I'm always asked when I give lectures to your generation, I'm always asked, what is the central challenge that you all are going to face going forward? You know, what is the biggest challenge to making sure that you have a prosperous future? And I always answer that the same. It's not global warming and all of these other things. Look, we're going to solve these kinds of ecological problems. I would make the case to you that the one thing that we should all be concentrating and focusing like a laser beam on is the answer to this question. Will the United States of America, this great, great, great country of ours, will we continue to be the global economic superpower on this planet as we have been for the last 75 years? I would submit to you, I think everyone would agree, that at least since the end of World War II, the United States has been the world economic superpower. We have been the hub of the world economy, and every other country is a spoke, right? But for the first time in any of our lifetimes, and especially what's going to influence you as young people, we do have an honest-to-goodness rival now, right? We do. And it's not, I remember John, in the 70s, people were worried about the Soviet Union catching up with the United States, and there was a period in the 80s when people thought Japan was going to take us over and so on. You know, we all know the Soviet Union was just lying about all of its statistics. But we do have this country that is catching up at a very rapid pace, and who is that? It's China, right? And what's happening in China, if you want to see a tribute to how free enterprise triumphs over socialism, explain to me, you know, what happened in China. Because China's a country for hundreds of years literally couldn't even feed itself, right? It couldn't even produce enough food to feed its citizens. Mao Zedong starved to death tens of millions of his own people, right? But now you have this country as they've moved, and by the way, I'm not making the case that China is a full free market economy. They certainly are not, but they've moved dramatically in that direction. As they have moved in that direction, what has happened in China? China's living standards have been doubling every 8 years. Their economic growth rate has been 10, 11, 12%. It's unprecedented almost on the global scale at any time in history, what's happened in China over the last 25 years. And so, you know, about a year ago, this minister, the economic minister from China, who's a bigwig in the Beijing government, he's the number 4 in the chain of command in Beijing, he came to the Wall Street Journal in New York, and this is one of the fun things about working at the Wall Street Journal. We meet with these, you know, muckety-mucks from all these nations, and he comes in and he's telling us all about all the wonderful things that are happening in China and how, you know, we're, you know, growing like crazy, and he's looking at their economy is like this, and our economy has been in this rut for the last 5 years, so he's very arrogant and, you know, preaching to us about how you make an economy grow. And finally, he comes to his end of his presentation. He says, and by our calculations, he says, by the year 2018, he says, we are going to become the #1 economy in the world. He says, we're going to catch the United States, and once we catch you people, we're just going to stampede right past you so fast, and we're going to look at you in our rear view mirror as we speed right past you. And you all don't know me very well, but if you cut me, I bleed red, white, and blue. So I kind of sprang out of my chair. You're supposed to not do this, but I couldn't control myself, and I said to this gentleman, I said, sir, what you've done in China is one of the great economic triumphs of history, and I want to salute you for this. But I said, not in my lifetime will China overtake the United States. And I said, and here, sir, is the reason why. It's because our Chinese are so much smarter than your Chinese. And he didn't like that very much, but it's true, right? And so the point I'm making is, look, we better get serious, and this is the challenge for your generation. What you need to do in your generation is make sure that our politicians in Washington concentrate on what matters most, and that is competitiveness. How do we ensure that the United States of America retains its competitive edge? That means we got to fix our tax system, our healthcare system, our tort system. We got to fix the overspending, of course, the enormous $17 trillion debt. We've got to get serious about fixing those problems. But my optimistic end, and John, I am at the end now, is to simply say this, that once that happens, and I believe it is going to happen, we're going to see these incredible reforms in Washington. They're coming soon. And when they do, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to see the biggest boom in this country you ever saw. Thank you very much for your kind attention. It's been great to be with you. Thank you, John.
So one of the purposes of the Odyssey lectures is to bring speakers to you who will challenge you and challenge your ideas. But importantly to us also, we want to bring speakers here who can learn from you by being challenged by you and your questions. So Steve's had his go at you or with you. Now it's your chance if you'd like to ask some questions of him so we can all grow together. Please raise your hands and I'll try to call on you. Please, Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for coming today. I just wanted to say, so one of your
Hold on. I'm a little deaf, so
That's all right. One of the statements you made was that we kind of see how cheap iPhones have become, and that in a few years they'll kind of take over as a kind of a product that all global people will have. And that's, I think, a testament to kind of one of the things Hayek speaks of is the echelon fashion of progress, is that we can have iPhones for so cheap because the rich bought them for $400 6 years ago, because they were purchased for like $400 years ago. So we kind of see a testament to the the innovative progress that has been made with something like an iPhone. My question for you is, you said that people in Zimbabwe will have iPhones and it'll be available to the least well-off members of society. But iPhones are not what the least off members of society need right now. So I'm curious if you can speak a bit about how there seems to be systems in place with the free market that incentivize certain products which are not necessarily what the lowest rungs of society need.
It's a great question. So let me answer that in a couple ways. First of all, you make a really important point. I mean, I wrote this book, Who's the Fairest of Them All, and it really is about income where the distribution of wealth is in this country. And there's no question, if you look at the United States today, our distribution of wealth, the gap between the rich and poor is wider than it's been at any time since the 1920s. Now that's in part because you've got incredibly rich people, right? You've got the people like Bill Gates and you've got people like Zuckerman and you've got people like Warren Buffett that are making, literally have incomes higher than some countries do. By the way, did you all see this story the other day? It was the front page in the Wall Street Journal, most newspapers in the country. There's this new app for the iPhone. It's called something like Snapshot or something where you take, what is that thing called? What is it? Yeah. So this thing is an amazing, see, I guess, and you know this better than I do because I'm technologically kind of behind, but apparently what you do is you can like send somebody an email, right? And then they open it and then it disappears. Is that? And this thing, I mean, these guys, these kids were like 23, 24, 25 years old. They invented this thing. I mean, Tom, is this a great tribute to American free enterprise system? They just came up with this concept. They've been at it for 4 years. They were offered $3 billion. Was it Google that offered them $3 billion for this. Oh, it's Facebook. I think Facebook. I forget whether it was Google or Facebook. $3 billion, these guys who were in their 20s, only in America, right? And they turned it down. They said, no, we're not going to take $3 billion. We think we can make $4 or $5 billion. I mean, so look, here's my point. You were talking about things like the cell phones and things like, you know, big screen TVs and all of these things. Here's what's really interesting about rich people and what's good about rich people. You know, when all of these new products first come out on the market, they're really expensive, right? You know, I remember like 10 years ago, those huge TVs, they cost like $3,000, and now you can get them for like $599. Who bought those things? Right? Who bought those huge flat screen TVs for $3,000? Rich people did, right? Because they're the only people who could afford them. So rich people are like the guinea pigs. They're the idiots who buy these things when they cost $3,000, so that years later we can buy them, you know, for $500, $400, $300. And that actually is really one of the benefits of having rich people in a society. They are the ones who are able to buy these things so they can come to market when they do. And then the whole history of America is that over time they become more affordable. Now, this gentleman makes a good point about, look, people in Zimbabwe, they don't need a cell phone, right? I mean, they could use one, but they need food, right? They need clean water. They need the basic essentials that we all as Americans take for granted. So what do they have to do to have those things? Well, I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. They better move towards a system of their economy that promotes growth. If you look at the countries in the world that are poor, and you look at the countries in the world that are rich, the countries that are poor are countries like Zimbabwe and countries like North Korea and other nations in Africa and so on. And then if you look at the countries that are rich, you're talking about Switzerland and you're talking about the United States and you're talking about Hong Kong and places like that. And then you ask yourself, what is the difference? Why? Why is Mexico poor and why is America rich? And I think we all kind of instinctively know the answer to that question. The United States and Switzerland and Hong Kong have a free enterprise system that rewards people for their entrepreneurial efforts, and these other countries don't. And it's amazing how quickly you can see a country turn around if they move in the right direction. If you don't believe that, look at what has happened in a country like China, for example. Or one of my favorite examples, and by the way, this isn't just my example, John, as you know, this was something that Milton Friedman used to talk about all the time. Explain why it is that North and South Korea, which 50 years ago, right after the end of World War II, about that time, around the 1940s, 1950s, those two countries were basically the same. They were ethnically the same. They had the same geography. They had the same culture. They had the same per capita income. And what happened? North Korea became socialist, right? South Korea became mostly capitalist. And what happened? South Korea's incomes grew 4 times faster than North Korea's did. So what I'm saying is the economic model matters a lot. And the good news is, by the way, these countries like Zimbabwe, and hopefully if they ever get a sane person running North Korea, and if you ever get those countries to reintegrate together, I think you're going to see those countries in a rapid catch-up. And I think that's a really good thing for the future of humanity.
Thank you. I want to, there are a lot of students who want to ask questions.
Sorry.
You're right for a newspaper, and brevity is the soul of wit, especially when papers.
You got it.
But there are even more so. So if we can be brief with questions, I'll try to get a lot of questions in. Men, please.
We've really enjoyed teaching your book. Sure. We've really enjoyed teaching your book, The Fairest of Them All. And in this highly recommended book, you make this argument that the U.S. is the fairest country in the world if you look at its economy. But in teaching this book, the students seem to raise 2 sets of concerns. The first concern has to do with extreme poverty. Right. So Catherine Eden of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government has found out that 3.5 million children in the U.S. live on less than $2 a day, which is below the international poverty line, below the per capita income of Haiti, Mozambique, Afghanistan. Right. It's an extreme level of deprivation. And the number of children living in extreme poverty has increased by over twice, 150% in the last 15 years. Mm-hmm. And a second concern, aside from extreme poverty, has to do with social mobility. So for instance, in the US, if you're born in the lowest 20% of income, about 40% of men will stay in that bracket for the rest of their lives. In the UK, by contrast, only 30% remain in that bracket. and in Denmark, only 25% remain in that bracket.
So those are good.
And so can I say that obviously those are really difficult questions. Can you just very briefly respond?
Very briefly. So I disagree with you profoundly on your second point. I mean, the most important thing about the United States, certainly for 2 centuries, you're right, this is not happening as much in the last 15 years as it has for 200 years. But what is most unique about the United States is what we call upward economic mobility. That is, people moving up the economic the economic ladder. And this is something in the 80s and 90s, for example, happened unbelievably rapidly. So the big shift that happened in the 80s and 90s, people, not all people, but most people who grew up poor moved into the middle class. Most people who were in the middle class moved in the upper middle class. Now, you're right, there are people in poverty in this country, there's no question about it, but there's no saying if you have to be poor, you want to be poor in the United States, you don't want to be poor, virtually anywhere else. The average poor family has a higher living standard than the average person in the middle class in virtually every other country in the world. So that's my kind of quick response to that. But we do, look, the fundamental point that you make, though, is our economy is only going to work, and we're going to only have kind of social cohesion in this country if we find ways to make sure that people at the bottom, the people that you're talking about, have a way to get into the middle class and up. That's been the story of the United States for the last 200 years. You're right, it's slowed down in the last 15 years. What I would do, I know you want brevity, but I would simply say this. There are a lot of things we can do to help people at the bottom. I think every low-income child in the United States should have total free choice in terms of where they go to school, so they don't have to go to the worst schools in the country. I think we should do things to try to lift those people up so they get the kind of training so that they can have the education so they can join the middle class.
Thanks so much. Ezra.
Hi.
Hi. So I think with the recent recession, with the recent economic crisis, a lot of economists from the left and the right, Talon, Greenspan, Krugman, everyone, has kind of had to rethink a lot of what they've believed about economics for the past 40, 50 years. Whatever. So my question is, you're an economist by trade, so I'm curious as to what can you remember as the last time you made an economic prediction that was wrong?
That I did what?
That you made an economic prediction and it turned out to be wrong.
Oh, okay. I make a lot of bad economic predictions. But I'll give you an example. I have been predicting, as you know, Tom, I've been predicting this, I've been wrong. For the last 3 years, I've been predicting we're going to see higher rates of inflation in this country. And there's a logical reason why you would think we would have higher inflation. And this gets to your point about how some of the economic models aren't working as we thought. You know this from your, how many of you have had at least one economics course here? Almost everybody. So what do you learn in your first economics course, hopefully? What is inflation? What is inflation? You all know this. Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods, right? So we've had this spectacular rise in the amount of money in the economy. If I showed you a chart of what's happened with money creation in this economy, it just goes straight through the roof in 2008, 9, 10, 11. We got QE1, QE2. How many of you heard of QE1, QE2, QE3? You all know these things. They're just ways of injecting money into the economy. As an economist, I always believe that when you're injecting all that money into the economy, that's going to cause inflation. But guess what? In the U.S. economy today, the one good piece of economic news is we don't have much inflation. The inflation rate's 2 to 3%. When I graduated from college, the inflation rate wasn't, 2 to 3%. Anybody in this room old enough to remember when we had 14% inflation in the 1970s? So I've been wrong in predictions like that. I still kind of scratch my head and say, where's the inflation? But the most important economic lesson we have learned, and you're right, economists have to rethink their models when things don't work out like the way they predicted. And I would make, and this is why it's so good, John, that you brought John Maynard Keynes in here, because I would make the case to you that no economist has been more discredited over the last 6 years than John Maynard Keynes. Because what we've done in this country over the last 5 years is we have had Keynesianism on steroids, right? We've borrowed $6 trillion in 5 years, more money than we borrowed for 200 years. We've had massive amount of money creation, everything that Keynes would have wished for, right? Spend, borrow, print money. We've done that for 5 years, and we've had the weakest recovery in 60 years. And Keynesians have to explain to us why it didn't work.
Thank you so much. Please.
So I have a question. Since you work at Fox News,
You know what? I'm sorry. I really can't.
Since you work at Fox News on a regular basis, I was wondering, from that perspective, do you truly believe it's bringing a fair and balanced perspective? And would you suggest other media outlets model themselves after Fox News?
Can you rephrase that, because I couldn't, John, did you hear?
Is Fox News fair and balanced?
Is Fox News fair and balanced? No, look, I actually think, look, there's no question that Fox News skews to the right, no question about it. And I actually think to its detriment. I actually think Fox News would be a better channel if it had more liberals on. When I'm on Fox, I have no problem debating liberals. I love debating liberals because they're wrong and I'm right. So I have an upper hand in those debates. But so really, I mean, truly, I think it would be it would be more interesting to watch. It would be more educational if they had not just a panel of 3 conservatives, but they put, more liberals on. But look, I mean, Fox News was a reaction to the state of the media in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. When this is, again, before a lot of your time, but before there were these cable outlets, they could only get their news from PBS, CBS, ABC, NBC, and they were all controlled by liberals. Look, I work in a newsroom right now. I see it every day. The newsroom is full. They're very professional people, some of the best writers you're ever going to see, but they're liberals. They don't believe in the free market. They believe in the power of government and so on. So I would make the case to you that Fox News was a reaction to that, and I think a welcome reaction. What's good about the media today is you all can watch whatever you want to. I mean, this is another thing that's so exciting about the economy today. When we were growing up, you could watch 3 stations. It was like the old saying, Henry Ford, you can have any color car you want as long as it's black. That's what the media was 20 years ago. Today, you can get your media from 1,000 sources, and I say that's great. If you don't like Fox News, the most powerful way to hurt Fox News is don't watch them. Don't watch them.
Thank you. I apologize to stop the questions now. Usually we have more time for questions, but we're running late. I'll let you know, though, that after we leave here, 20 freshmen from a class that I teach called Freedom will be having dinner with Steve, and I assure you they'll be given time to ask him a lot of the questions that no doubt are on your minds. It won't give you the chance to learn yourself what he might say, but you'll be assured that he'll have a chance himself perhaps to learn from the questions that they'll be asking him. I also want to mention, first, please join me in thanking Steve. Thank you. Thank you. And I also want to mention, as many of you know, the Janus Forum is looking at itself and trying to reinvent ourselves in some ways. One of the things we're still doing some event planning for the spring. There's one event in particular, another Odyssey lecture that you may find of interest, a lecture that, again, is meant to bring someone to campus who will bring ideas to you that will challenge you and who you might in turn challenge. And the person we haven't finalized yet, but we're getting close, the person is Rick Ross, not the rapper Rick Ross. The project's working with the Students for Responsible Drug Policy, and we're hoping to bring Freeway Rick Ross for the next Odyssey lecture. So I hope you all look forward to that. Thanks so much for coming.